Welcome to the first installment in my 9-day bike trip series, where I'll be exploring central and eastern Ontario from the seat of my bicycle. On this trip I'll be riding my new linear limo recumbent bike loaded with 2 giant waterproof panniers, a small tent and sleeping pad, and 4 insulated water bottles. Today is Saturday, May 18, 2019, and I left home just after 8 a.m. Starting from my apartment in the annex of downtown Toronto, the first segment of my trip is to ride southbound to Toronto's Union Station. From here I pushed my bike through the station and boarded the Lakeshore East GO train to Oshawa. I've biked the route from Toronto to Oshawa several times before, and although there are sections which are nice, I decided to bypass it today by taking the train. On a trip like this where I have a limited number of days to travel, I prefer to maximize my time spent exploring new territory, and GO Transit's commuter rail service helps me do that. The ride to Oshawa takes 50 minutes and costs $10.31 with a Presto card. I arrived in Oshawa just after 9:30 and was ready to begin my journey. So starting from the Oshawa GO station, today I'll be riding east along the shoreline of Lake Ontario to the town of Cobourg. For most of the ride I'll be following along a signed bike route called the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail. I'm expecting it to be a mixture of separated pathways, on-street bike lanes, and quiet country roads. The only major community I'll be passing through is Port Hope, which is about 10 kilometers from my final destination. So I got on my bike and started making my way east through the city of Oshawa. The temperature is about 13 degrees Celsius this morning, but the sun is shining brightly and I removed my jacket pretty soon after getting started. This is the headquarters of General Motors of Canada, who for many years operated 3 automotive assembly plants in Oshawa. I've now entered the municipality of Clarington, and the waterfront trail briefly passes through Darlington Provincial Park. I have fond memories from my childhood of riding my bike with my family from our home in Whitby to camp at Darlington Provincial Park. I'm sure it was trips like that which helped to inspire me to do these kind of vacations as an adult. This trail here seems to have been recently added and is very nice and smooth to ride on. On the right I'm riding past the large site occupied by the Darlington Nuclear Station, which is Ontario's second largest power plant. This other large facility further along the shoreline is the St. Mary's Cement Plant. Yesterday when I was back at home I received a comment on one of my YouTube videos by a regular viewer. Unlike most of the people who comment on my videos, I've actually met this man in person when we attended a cycling event this past winter. He told me that he lives in Clarington and has ridden his bike across Canada. So this morning as I'm riding along the Clarington Waterfront Trail, I'm reminded of that comment. The viewer I'm referring to is Jim Boat, and I was completely blown away when I rode past this sign, recognizing his advocacy in the continuous improvement of cycling safety in Clarington. Thank you, Jim, for all your great work. This modern subdivision I'm riding through is part of the Port of Newcastle. The time is just after 11:30 now, and I've ridden approximately 35 kilometers so far. I decided to make a quick stop in this park here to stretch my muscles. The blue sky has now become quite cloudy, and with the cooler air temperature I found it pretty cold when I stopped. The roads I'm riding on here are really quiet and peaceful. Here I'm passing through the small community of Port Granby. While I'm riding I'm listening to a local radio station on my portable AM/FM radio. Here I'm entering the municipality of Port Hope, which is within Northumberland County. The municipality encompasses a pretty large area, and the community of Port Hope is still another 12 kilometers from the border. On this first day of the trip, I'm finding my distance seems to be accumulating really slowly, which is probably because I'm watching my odometer on my GPS too closely. As they say, a watched kettle never boils, so I'm trying my best to distract myself by thinking about other things. Port Hope is where I'm planning to stop for lunch today, so I'm very glad to see this sign welcoming me. The time is now nearly 1:30, and I'm definitely feeling hungry for lunch. My last time visiting this community was 21 years ago, back in 1998 on a family bike trip. The community of Port Hope was first settled in 1793 by the United Empire Loyalists. It's a really pretty small town with lots of beautiful historic buildings. The main downtown strip is built on a street which slopes down a hill with a river at the bottom. Port Hope's downtown is said to be the best preserved 19th century streetscape in Ontario. One of the things I remember from my visit here when I was 9 years old was their dollar store. It was the first time I'd ever been inside a store like this, and I was really fascinated by how many things could be bought for just $1. So I'm really glad to see that dollar store is still there. As we made my way down the hill, I browsed the different restaurant options. This is the Ganaraska River, which flows through Port Hope and empties into Lake Ontario. Fittingly, the name Ganaraska comes from an indigenous word which means the river that flows through the town. The restaurant I chose for lunch is called Jim's Pizza and Subs. I decided to order a meatball sub, which is something I've ordered many times before, but when the server brought it out, it looked a lot different than any meatball sub I'd had before. The sub was made from an entire loaf of garlic bread, sliced in half and served open-faced, with the contents of the sandwich covered by a thick layer of melted mozzarella cheese. It was delicious and quite filling. While I was in the restaurant and looking out the window at my bike, I noticed that the rear cargo rack was tilted back at a strange angle, so I decided to investigate. Unfortunately, the rack's vertical supports had become bent backwards, and some were so badly bent they're cracked. With more than 800 kilometers of riding left to do on this trip, a cracked rack will not be sufficient. Thankfully, I discovered this while I was in a town, so I got back on my bike and carefully rode to the nearest hardware store. Replacing my rack with a new one will be really difficult to do, since most standard racks won't fit on my recumbent bike without custom fabricated parts. I decided to try repairing my broken rack by reinforcing the cracked aluminum tubes with steel rods. As it turned out, the store didn't have any rods of the right diameter, so I ended up buying some long 1/4-inch bolts instead. The bolts were a great fit inside the tubing, but the heads needed to be cut off, so I also bought a small hacksaw. The easiest way I could find to hold them while cutting was inside the rack like this. So as you can see, the steel rods fit perfectly inside the hollow aluminum tubing and will significantly reinforce this weak point on the rack. To hold everything in place, I also bought some 2-part epoxy, which I smeared all over the inside of the tubes before inserting the rods. For good measure, I also put some epoxy on the outside of these joints. I would have preferred to use JB metal reinforced epoxy for this job, but the store didn't have any available. The epoxy from the store seemed to be past its shelf life and took a lot longer than 3 minutes to harden. After I had the rack reinstalled on my bike, I loaded everything up to ride the remaining 10 kilometers to Coburg. The time is now 5:45, and as I was pulling into town, I heard my phone ringing, so I stopped to answer it. It was my campground for tonight calling, letting me know that they'll be closing in 15 minutes, and I need to get there as soon as possible. Thankfully, I'm only about 5 minutes away, and I'm really glad that my rack repair hadn't delayed me any further. I quickly rode through downtown Coburg and went straight to Victoria Park, which is home to the Coburg Trailer Park, where I'll be camping tonight. It's really unique getting to camp so close to the downtown area of a town, and I'm expecting I'll enjoy my stay here. As the name suggests, the park is almost entirely occupied by trailers, but there are a few small areas for people with tents. This area here is where I'll be camping tonight, so I unpacked everything and set up my tent. Just beyond the campground is the Coburg beach. With the air temperature now below 10 degrees Celsius and the water temperature in the lake probably even colder, a swim at the beach this evening isn't very appealing. But I'm sure this would be a great place to be on a hot summer day. After setting up my campsite, I got back on my bike to explore Coburg and find a place to eat dinner. This road here has a contraflow bike lane on it, but it seems to be in bad need of repaving. Coburg was first settled by the Loyalists in 1798, and although not quite as well preserved as Port Hope, it also has a nice historic downtown. The current population of this town is about 20,000. As I rode along the main street, I browsed the various restaurant options available. I'm having a hard time choosing since I'm still feeling fairly full from my lunch, but I know I'll need to eat something since I've got a long day of riding ahead of me tomorrow. I ended up choosing a Japanese restaurant called Golden Chopsticks. The restaurant had a nice atmosphere, and at 8 p.m. it was nice and quiet, and the service was really fast. I ordered their Boston and spicy California sushi roll, which were both really tasty and the perfect amount of food. After dinner, I decided to explore out to the end of the harbor pier, which is close to my campground. Unlike a lot of small town harbors I've seen on the Great Lakes, the Coburg harbor is not built at the mouth of a creek or a river, it's just built in a bay. After this final exploration of Coburg, I headed back to my campsite, had a shower, and got ready to sleep in my tent. I was hoping to get to sleep as early as possible tonight since I've got a really long day of riding tomorrow, but my neighbors in one of the other campsites thought it was a good idea to turn on some very loud music starting at 10 p.m. Thankfully, I have earplugs with me which worked really well, and I was asleep in no time. So including venturing around Coburg, I rode my bike a total of 82 kilometers today. Stay tuned for the next installment in this video series, where tomorrow I'll continue riding my bike east along the shoreline of Lake Ontario to Sandbanks Provincial Park, which is located in Prince Edward County. I'll be crossing my fingers and hoping that the repair that I did to my rack will hold up throughout my ride tomorrow. I hope you've enjoyed joining me for day one of this trip. If you watched all the way to the end of the video, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment, and thanks for watching.